bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à cette présentation qui portera sur l'analyse comparative entre les sexes plus dans l'évaluation de programme avec comme invité Jane Whynot. Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation by Jane Whynot on Stocktaking on GBA Plus in Program Evaluation. My name is Eric Champagne, I'm the Director of the Center on Governance and I'm also a member of the Board of Director of PPX. Before we start, I would like to pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and futures. Now, I would like to invite my colleague, Melanie Windsor. She's the Vice President of the Board of Directors of PPX, to say a few welcoming words, thank the partners, and say a few words maybe about the upcoming PPX Symposium. Melanie?
Merci, Eric. Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's event. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Center of Governance, University of Ottawa, the Graduate Diploma in Public Policy and Program Evaluation at Carleton University, as well as the Canadian Evaluation Society, National Capital Chapter, for jointly hosting this event today with PPX. I would also like to thank Jane for agreeing to do this presentation, and it promised to be a fantastic one. Finally, just a quick little note to remind everybody to take a look at our new website. PPX relaunched its website in January. It's a lot easier to use. And this week, you will see registration will open for our 25th annual symposium on May 25th and 26th. This will also give you an opportunity to do some training on performance measurement, planning, and risk. And finally, if it will be a virtual event. So thank you and have a great session. Eric.
Thank you so much, Melanie. So now I would like to turn to our guest speaker for today. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to welcome Jane Whynot. She's a world-class expert in program evaluation and GBA Plus. Jane has joined the firm Gus Gilroy as a partner in 2021 after finishing her doctoral studies at the University of Ottawa, and I was very privileged to be the president of her jury when she defended her excellent dissertation. Jane's passion includes ensuring representations of diversity in performance stories. Over the past 2 decades, she has worked on over 75 applied research and evaluation projects. She's also very actively involved in the domestic evaluation community. She's been serving as the president and past president of the Canadian Evaluation Society at the National Capital Region chapter. She's currently the editorial team of the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation. She was recognized by the Canadian Evaluation Society in 2020 with the National Service to the Society Award, and in 2021 with the Carl Boudreau Award for Leadership in Evaluation. James holds a Master in Assessment and Evaluation from the University of Melbourne, as well as a graduate certificate in Policy and Program Evaluation from Carleton University, where she still is involved as an instructor. Jane will take about 30 minutes to present her ideas on the subject, and she will then take questions. And I would like to invite you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask your question, and you can start anytime. You can start writing your question. This is the only way you're going to be able to ask your question today, but you can start at any time. We'll take your question later. I will now start your PowerPoint, Jane, and you let me know when I need to change the slides. The floor is yours.
Super. Thank you, Eric, for such a lovely introduction. And I'm going to go red because I'm embarrassed. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity that I have to share the results of my research here today. And so I wanted to say thank you to the joint individuals groups who had brought me here to share some of these findings on the platform in the event that we are moving forward with GBA. And this is a bit of a retrospective and let's do some thinking about it moving forward. We have a full agenda. We've got about half an hour. So I'm just going to move into sort of positioning my efforts, because really, as a good feminist, it's integral to be clear about our sort of perspectives, our positionality in moving forward. And so I had been involved as the only evaluator at Status of Women during a time when the 2009 OAG report was released. And so there were tenuous connections made between gender-based analysis and the federal government evaluation function at that time. We heard hints, whispers of these connections, but they weren't really formalized. And it was taking a long time for the gender-based analysis at that time, plus later, to gain traction in the evaluation community. And so I had advocated in my role as the National Capital Chapter President for CES in promoting conferences and speaking events, knowledge exchange. It's also important to acknowledge that, you know what, I was heavily involved with the American Evaluation Society in topical interest group with feminist and gender evaluation issues. And so I thought, you know what, taking a moment of reflection, why isn't this getting any more sort of recognition and traction within the evaluation function? And I thought, afterwards, from my co-chair of the 2014 conference, I thought, you know what, I know a little bit about both of these things at that time, almost a decade ago, and thought, I'm going to study them. And so when I had approached Caroline Andrew at the University of Ottawa, it was a prime opportunity. And she said, yes, of course, like this makes sense. And so that began the journey, my sort of formal studies at the doctoral level about investigating the linkages more formally and how federal government evaluation function approached. Eric, if I could get you to move to sort of the brief history. I talked about the 2009 component, and those linkages at that time were really sort of hints or whispers. But it wasn't really until the OAG had revisited in the GBA follow-up that those linkages became a little bit more crystal clear. One more slide, please. Thank you. Oh, sorry, one back. Yeah, one more forward. We'll get it right, folks. Just bear with us. Thank you. And so in 2015, those roles and responsibilities with respect to sort of the engagement, the alignment, the linkages between gender-based analysis became a little bit more crystal clear. And internally within SWC, which was Status of Women Canada at that time, we advocated really hard for sort of to embed gender-based analysis in the policy cycle. And Canada is really unique internationally because of its government, because of the extent of integration of gender-based analysis and plus across the policy cycle. But that latter little loop in the policy cycle with respect to performance measurement and evaluation hadn't yet been closed. And so with the release of the policy on results in 2016, there was, for the first time ever since the release of the policy circular, first time ever, the integration, the articulation of gender-based analysis as a federal government priority. And the thinking behind that was to give a little bit more meat, so to speak, to the bones. And then subsequently, we saw sort of the elaboration in the interim guidance in 2017. And then in 2018 as well, we saw the release of the primer on integrating gender-based analysis for the federal government. So what does that mean? Really, why is gender-based analysis plus so important to evaluation? So that policy cycle that I had the opportunity to introduce with all the elements that had previously been incorporated with respect to cabinet documents, the MCs, the TB subs, the loop wasn't closed. And so federal government interventions, evaluation and performance measurement are the only two functions that report on the actual results. So there's an opportunity there to leverage the sort of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm going to refer to it as ZDI from this point forward, sort of from the ex post examination perspective. And so that's super critical. We're closing the loop and figuring out what it does. There were problems, however, because sorry, Eric, can I ask you to advance to why the evaluation function is lagging? Thank you. Awesome. So the assessment function that has been associated with intersectional research, including gender-based analysis, has traditionally been assessed as weak. There's problems across the board. We don't know how good, there's no quality criteria that have been clearly established. In addition to which, you're positioning what is essentially a feminist situated knowledge methodology in the middle of a bureaucracy. And so there were some functional cultural differences that have been alluded to, including communications exemplified by language use, that have presented challenges for the two functions. And not only the inability or the reluctance to recognize and conceptualize those evaluation core issues for programs to interpret as gender-based analysis plus being relevant for them have caused concerns. And so the inexperience, lack of examples sort of across the federal government, the lack of guidance that took so long to realize in the form of the primer, and the evolving nature of gender-based analysis plus across that policy cycle has made it difficult. Some of the groups that we'd had the opportunity to engage with had likened it to a double Dutch exercise, meaning we're not quite sure to jump in and what point. Next slide, please. There are evaluation specific challenges as well. And so some of these are sort of, the organizations have identified challenges, particularly those that are not providing direct services to individuals, third-party deliverers, and balancing some of the reporting requirements, and those that are sector focused, meaning again, they don't have a direct relationship with individuals, because at the core of GBA is the need for disaggregated data. In addition to which, in the federal government, we're working on a 5-year policy cycle, and the evaluation is set at sort of the end of the 5 years. And so when they had introduced it in the policy on results in 2016, what they found was programs weren't designed to meet the needs of diverse Canadians. And so having to be accountable for some of those elements when it came time to evaluation, there's a disconnect there. Because programs haven't been designed with the unique diverse needs of Canadians in mind, what it means also is there hasn't been an opportunity for the competency to be developed to identify how these programs, as part of the design phase and across the policy cycle through to evaluation, are related to relevance. meaning that, you know what, the EDI issue that could be conceptualized as part of the gender-based analysis, identify the issue, challenge assumptions. Programs don't have the expertise or the competency necessarily to do that. And that's not saying that there aren't good examples out there, because there are, in the instances, conversely, in which direct relationships and or sort of biological and or where instances they've been enabled by legislations that direct the organizations. So we have the guidance materials in place, and let's be clear, the process of developing those guidance materials on gender-based analysis, a primer, was almost a full decade exercise. And having sat as a working group member on the first draft of the guidance back in 2009, realized that, you know what, those easy to direct relationships with individuals facilitated the application of gender-based analysis in evaluation, but made it really hard for other organizations to sort of adapt promising practices and respond in that way. Eric, next slide. So it's important, I note at this time, to explain that my research took a theory-based approach to this. And what that meant was I, like a good evaluator, outlined from activities all the way through to improved EDI outcomes at the stage, and situated both evaluation and evaluation adjacent functions, because gender-based analysis is a shared responsibility that is supposed to be able to provide information for decision making. And so underpinning that movement from one phase in a relationship to another are a bunch of underlying assumptions that occur. And let's keep in mind, research is taking place in an evolving policy dynamic and representative of a snapshot of that particular moment. So I'm hoping that we continue to evolve in this way. I have some findings, and these are cross-cutting, sort of across and extend from the period of research in its inception through to sort of the conclusion in 2020, when I stopped writing and took a moment of reflection. And one of the things I'd realized right at the beginning is the relationship between gender-based analysis and equity to diversity and inclusion wasn't necessarily articulated clearly. So that meant in some organizations, gender-based analysis was EDI. In other organizations, gender-based analysis was intended to support EDI. And still in others, there was no relationship. And it's important because if gender-based analysis is to be used as a tool to support EDI, then we need to backtrack a little bit and recognize, which they were starting to do at the beginning of the policy cycle, that the diverse needs of Canadians and the government interventions are required to meet the needs of these diverse Canadians. And the programs weren't designed necessarily to do this. What it meant, I had heard from stakeholders, is there's also sort of resources. And when I say resources, I mean capacity, money, tools, training to support the inclusion of multiple groups of diverse Canadians. Resources haven't been allocated to those needs. Next slide. So there is also a historical legacy that has been left in the transition from gender to gender-based analysis plus, with its emphasis on plus and all the other identity elements that are represented in an individual. And so oftentimes interventions had access to either sex or gendered information, and consequently position gender as your primary analytical variable. But what was found, thanks to the research and research from other academics in this area, is that, you know what, there are other identity elements that are more important than gender in certain contexts. And we haven't evolved to this stage yet as an evaluation function where we necessarily know what those are. So in using gender-based analysis plus, sometimes we're using terminology that is aligned with gender-based analysis plus, particularly at the beginning of the research. When we'd say Northern communities, we meant Indigenous populations. So our thinking is continuing to evolve on this and how we are using the various identity elements as we mature as an evaluation function and moving through this. Next slide, Eric. Thank you. So I'd mentioned already that one of the key elements of gender-based analysis plus is the access to disaggregated identity data. And I think for those of us who have been working in the federal government evaluation function for quite some time, we know that there's a problematic relationship between evaluation and performance measurement. And policy, the results policy, policies on evaluation have continued to evolve in a way that support, because the responsibility for performance measurement information falls to the program. Not necessarily related to GBA Plus, because what we also found, what I found in the research is because evaluation also has the potential to produce disaggregated information during the course of an evaluation and to explore gender-based analysis plus, this maybe isn't quite as important as we would have thought it was. We still need access to disaggregated data. It's the timing of when we need disaggregated data. So next slide, please. So federal government evaluation functions have stepped up to the challenge, and we're starting to explore and build competencies in these areas. And over the course of the research, I had the opportunity to follow 6 departments as case studies. And what I found was there's a real range of experiences in there. Early research suggests that, you know what, some lines of evidence are better suited to identifying gender-based analysis plus and or EDI considerations. And so surveys, for example, are great at understanding that differences exist. Interviews, focus groups, conversely, can identify the nature of the barriers, whereas surveys just indicate, you know what, that the barrier or barriers exist. There's a number of ways that groups' evaluation functions have integrated GBA into their evaluation frameworks. And that includes both a direct and an indirect positioning of GBA from key evaluation questions, sub-questions, and indicators. And both of those are direct and indirect. One of the things that I found was that the groups that tended to address directly either the GBA EDI issue had in fact reported improved EDI outcomes rather than embedding it in an indirect way at either of those levels. Being explicit about it in evaluation scoping, key informant interviews, real range of responses. And what has been really nice to see is adaptations in including gender-based analysis plus explicitly in reach mechanisms that Treasury Board has recommended moving in that direction as well. while it's a start, it's still not there because there's still power and privilege issues about who gets to say who's determining reach and what groups should be included in identifying reach. We saw some really innovative methods with respect to databases from different departments being integrated in a way to conduct more fulsome gender-based analysis plus on key identity variables in ways that hadn't been done before. And what's innovative about that is sort of the cross-departmental reach and integration of the databases, of course, respecting privacy issues, but it was a step towards actually conducting intersectional research in a way that was envisioned when Status developed the online training tool and promoted gender-based analysis plus across the government. We also saw sort of other innovations, oversampling of participants from equity-seeking groups and focus groups, and breaking down some of those elements to make sure that voices from traditionally marginalized groups or underrepresented groups were heard. Because oftentimes in doing the analysis, you discard as an outlier, and you can't do that in equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. So one of the things that has been a struggle as we've moved through this exercise is about how to define the quality of GBA. And so the earliest guidance materials on gender-based analysis from Status of Women had actually indicated not just monitor and evaluate, which is what is currently present, but to evaluate the quality. And so the quality for me means, are the issues right? Are the challenging of assumptions correct? And so in the absence of the articulated quality criteria, budget documents have suggested an emphasis on the development stage, meaning the economic updates suggest that, you know what, having access to gender-based analysis information at the beginning of a project or program is more important than, I mean, it's a poor proxy substitute for quality. So what gender-based analysis has done has advanced sort of the equity, diversity, inclusion considerations by the evaluation functions. And the emphasis really has resided on the D, meaning diversity. So groups are gathering data on specific identity groups, but they're not necessarily addressing the equity and inclusion pieces that are necessary to get to overall and improved equity, diversity, inclusion outcomes for individuals. I know there's work being done on that. Next slide, please. So one of the things, where does this leave us? And so we, in light of the pandemic, in light of our socio-political, cultural needs to be more inclusive and equitable, we need to step up. And that means building competencies in the evaluation function to address in a way that meets the needs, particularly of the, I see a little finger moving around on the slide, the equity and inclusion pieces. Be direct about it, be intentional about it. This is I think, our new generation of evaluation. And we've seen the development of that sort of branch on our evaluation theory tree that emerges with the social justice orientation. And so we are well placed to support in that way. One of the things, there has been a lot of learning that has occurred in the last 3 or 4 years, in particular from organizations. And some have been quite shy about sharing their efforts. We don't have to make the mistake or positive outcome. There are opportunities to learn across the board. And it also raises questions for us as we move into sort of the next wave of evaluation and performance measurement functions to gauge methodology in the way that was intended to undertake truly intersectional research. Eric, I think we're at the end, sir. Questions, comments?
Indeed, Jane, questions are coming in, and while they are coming in, and while people are digesting all the food for thought that you presented, I'd like to share, we have about 300 people participating today. We had about 670 registrants for your webinar today, and I would like to just to make sure that people can keep in touch. I'll put into the chat room some information on the host of the event today on PPX. To stay in touch, I will put some information into the chat box. So about PPX, how to stay in touch, about the Center on Governance as well. You can subscribe to our newsletter and to attend other free activities we have. We also have information about Carleton's programs in evaluation, and as well, we want to share the information about the Canadian Evaluation Society. It's all into the chat box now. And now let's look at the questions that were presented here. I saw a question earlier about the possibility to we are recording right now, and there's a strong possibility that we're going to share the video for those who couldn't attend today and for those who are here. So there's a plan here to propose some post editing video of this presentation. So we will try to take some of the questions. I will take a question from participants. It's Dragger B. Any advice for those doing GBA Plus analysis on scientific technical performance evaluation? Do you understand the question, Jane? And if you do, please, can you respond?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great question, because one of the things that sort of during my period of engagement at SW, Status of Women Canada, and ESDC, I recognized that, at GBA is not something that can be cut and paste from one program to another, because each of the contexts, each of the operational environments, because of who is involved, both sort of stakeholders involved with the program as well as the program beneficiaries, are so different. And what it means is really doing some deep thinking about how those, let's identify the issue and challenge the assumptions, could be applied. I'll stop here at this point and give a big shout out to CIHR, because they have been working at the cutting edge of gender-based analysis plus and EDI issues for a long time now. And so they were one of the first sort of federal government results evaluation functions that had taken it seriously, started collecting disaggregated data, embedded it across their reporting mechanisms, so ensuring the alignment between performance measurement and the evaluation functions. They have some really great examples of how they've implemented gender-based analysis plus across the board. And so if we're thinking about the scientific performance evaluations in that way, that's one good resource. Another sort of shout out in coming across emerging promising or best practices in having had that opportunity is NSERC and SHIRK. They share a joint evaluation shop, and they've approached gender-based analysis from an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. And we can see the impact that evaluation has when considering equity, diversity, and inclusion, because we can actually trace some of those steps in how some of the programming at the Tri-Council agencies has delivered as a result of evaluation's recognition of those issues. Has it been an easy journey? No. Has it been a long journey? Yeah, like we're talking 15 years of evaluation supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion to make real changes. But now you can actually see the results of that. The other word of advice that I would offer is that gender-based analysis, oftentimes people don't understand exactly what it means. So when you're scoping it into the evaluation and defining the parameters, be really clear about it. Because you could just say, I'm going to figure out how gender-based analysis works and we'll do a GBA, because they've heard it referred to as sort of an output, a sort of process, a tool that can be used. But really, I think it's about having a competency to think about things. And once you grasp that competency lens, it's hard to unsee, because it's about who has access to things and who participates in. That's sort of the very first step. And then you can go down the line after you've figured out what your identity variables are. Status of women in their sort of first iterations back in, I'd say 2005, with the Standing Committee commissioned an expert panel on accountability mechanisms for gender equality. And they had recommended at that time, start small and build on your successes. So in terms of developing and scoping some of those early issues, I'm like, it's a good place to start. And then you can build up to. If we look at, sorry, one last thing, and then I'll move on to the next question. We look at the core issues around relevance and need in Canadians for evaluation. And one of the things we have to be cognizant of in making this shift is diverse Canadians is a large group of people. So let's do some thinking about that. And the more that you know about your program and program beneficiaries, the better placed you are.
Great, Jane. And I noticed that the questions are coming in great volume. So we're going to try to accelerate a little bit. So a short question from an anonymous attendee. What do you mean by reach mechanism? And I deserve a short question, I guess. A short answer, I mean. Okay, what do you mean by reach mechanism? Yeah.
Yeah, so reach in theory-based evaluation refers to stakeholders that are engaged and the reactions that result from sort of following activities. So that reach position means it could be program beneficiaries, it could be sort of program representatives, it could be sector representatives. So there's a lot of opportunity to integrate gender-based analysis in reach.
Thank you, Jane. And a very interesting question from Nicole Crozier. Gender-based analysis plus has been rolled out in Canadian foreign development programs. Do you have any findings on how this approach has been received in other country contexts? I think it's a very interesting question that she's asking here. But do you have any, have you been exposed to that specifically in international development?
Yeah, so to give a nod to international development, they were much more prescient in their approach to integrating gender in evaluation than the Canadians government-wise have been in the past. And we can look to examples from the UNEG, United Nations evaluation groups, that have been long promoting guidance materials for integrating gender and human rights. Integrating gender and human rights isn't necessarily the same thing as gender-based analysis. So you need to be clear in making the distinction. And also, to be super clear, gender-based analysis plus was grounded, the guidance materials that we have are grounded in sort of unilateral primary analytical variables. So emphasis on gender. And so one of the downfalls of the primer materials doesn't necessarily address the power and privilege. So it's a shortcoming in that respect. Whereas I know the UNEG guidance materials, World Bank, do address that. So there's some critical differences conceptually about how to look at these things and what the power and potential of gender-based analysis plus is. I know Canadian foreign development programs, particularly through global affairs, are taking a much more feminist approach to evaluation, meaning they're really getting into addressing some of those power and privilege dynamics that have been forefront in not present in gender-based analysis.
Lovely, Jane. And I have an interesting question here from Rizard Shello. He's talking about the prerequisite of GBA Plus in the program development. So in the performance management frameworks and RBM more generally, in order to be able to conduct such an evaluation work. So do you think there's more prerequisites now? How is it working right now concretely?
Yeah, so is it a prerequisite, a development stage? If it's a federal government program, GBA is now a requirement for TB sub-cabinet MC documents. So you can't get away from that. Whereas in the past, organizations could have identified as part of the TB sub not relevant. Standing Committee Status of Women Parliament came back and said, we would like to not accept any applications that say not relevant in making the case that says it is all relevant and you just have to do some deep thinking about how to conceptualize what the issues are and challenge those assumptions. So that is a yes. To be fair as well, though, the policy on results and the requirement which articulated gender-based analysis, not plus, as a federal government priority, as a grandfathering sort of 5-year window. So programs that had not traditionally considered have a bit of a grace period before adapting to full implementation. I'm closing the cycle.
Thanks, Jane. And almost a follow-up question to this. Is there a value in having your policy shop and evaluation shop more closely aligned, like in more closely integrated? Does it improve the quality of GBA Plus analysis getting done? And have you seen any organization that do this well?
Yeah, so one of the things I can speak to is the fact that small organizations, regardless of positioning of policy and eval and planning, seem to have a nimbleness in being able to respond to GBA EDI issues more quickly than do traditionally siloed larger departments. So I'm struggling with the caveat around well, because as somebody who is coming from the world of gender-based analysis, there, I think, is always more to be done. There's limitations on resources. So does it improve the quality of GBA Plus? Our quality criteria is still, as of yet, undefined. So that is sort of one of the thresholds that I think we need to firmly establish moving forward, particularly for the gender-based analysis function.
Great, thanks, Jane. And somebody is asking, there's evaluator who wants to do this, but don't have the leadership support, not only the resources. What advice do you have? How can we get this on the radar of the heads of evaluation and directors of evaluation circles, that this isn't an optional thing for evaluation shop? who wants to be world class.
Yeah, kudos to wanting to improve your evaluation function. So as one of my lines of evidence in the research, I had surveyed heads of evaluation from across the federal government, and results consistently came back and said, we can see the value of doing this. We can see the relevance of doing this, but making the case to actually realize both of those components is a tricky bit. And so one of the words of advice I would offer this individual who doesn't want to be doing this alone is reach out to other evaluation, either shops and or individuals who are doing it and have built some competencies in this area so that you can in turn build your own competencies.
This is the importance of a good community of practice, isn't it? Clemencia Osa is thanking you, first of all, and she's asking if there's good material that you can refer to on DEI evaluation. Is there something you can, just to orient the participants towards, I don't know, some kind of a good reference, good document? If we have time, maybe we can put that into the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of materials out there that focus on gender and or diversity, inclusion, and evaluation. And so I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and as one of the editors, I'd love to say that, you know what, there are always new resources coming in. One of the ones that I've just gotten in this month that I'm knee deep into is I shouldn't reach over during the thing, is program theory and cultural appropriateness in evaluation. Other shout outs that I'd give would be to Donna Podums and feminist evaluation. Donna Mertens as well does a really good job on cultural evaluation.
Thank you, Jane. What are the approaches to ensure folks get enough resources to properly conduct GBA Plus? Do you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think scoping realistically at the beginning of an evaluation to ensure that you do have the appropriate resources, and then identify when you say resources, what do you mean? Do you mean capacity? Do you mean time? Do you mean expertise? What exactly is it that you are going to do when you're doing that? Some of the folks had talked about developing a business case for integrating gender-based analysis, but it was also embedded throughout their strategic priorities within their organization. So do a little bit of homework and figure out exactly what it is that you're looking for, I think. Leadership engagement and political will are two of the key dimensions that you can influence. And shout out to Justin Trudeau, because if he hadn't reprioritized gender equality and gender-based analysis by extension back in 2015, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
Jane, there's a question about something you address in your presentation about the methodology. And the question is, if you only focus on the evaluation of a program, is it easy to end to say no data, the absence of data? And shouldn't the government mandate that all new policies, programs, and initiative have a mandatory data collection strategy specific to GBA Plus or EDI?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's two separate annexes at the front end of the developments, the policy cycle, meaning there's the results annex, and then there's the gender-based analysis annex, and never the twain shall meet. They're not necessarily integrated, but it is true that, when policies, programs, initiatives that are new should have a mandatory data collection strategy. You can budget for that as part of your ask.
Okay, there's a question here from Sausan Al-Rafai. When gender is mainstream in evaluation, which is is still not common practice, and intersectional gender lens is not applied. So gender lens is applied as a standalone from other demographics, which really does not provide an accurate picture about how access of different gender groups is evaluated. What were the main challenges to apply both gender and race, ADI lenses cross evaluation, for example? Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to refer back to, there's a continuum of intersectional research that is being undertaken. And so it moves from a single additive, comparative, intra and intersectional sort of conundrum across that continuum. And the issue when you're looking at gender and or sex and or any other identity variable alone, you're not capturing what is intended, nor the dynamics of the sociopolitical, economic, cultural conditions. Like interventions take place in real life situations. And to just isolate one element is, I think, not necessarily a really great account. By all means, absolutely, it is a starting point. And as you develop competencies, you're able to move along that continuum of intersectional research. What are the main challenges? It's not just gender and race. So Reagan and Fisk found in my own research, you know what, you keep going essentially intersectional research until you find a point at which identity variables don't report a difference. So it could be gender and race and sexuality and religion and visible minority status and. And so that is one of the biggest concerns, I think, in really undertaking truly intersectional research, because you don't have infinite resources as an evaluation function in the federal government. So you have to do some background digging to figure out which identity elements are important or you think that are important for your program and at what juncture they are important to move forward.
All right, Jane, there's one of our guests that says, you mentioned we have ended up with less lag in the area of diversity. What does getting inclusion right look like? And I don't know if you cover it, but you want to add to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I had the opportunity to speak at an annual event as a panelist for some of the things. And I think doing it really right because we've just in the last 10 years moved from being able to identify the difference between sex and gender. And so there is a continuum in moving from the language of equality to equity, meaning we don't give everybody the same resources. That means it's equal. It's recognizing that differential need in that consequently, there are different resources, supports that are necessary to achieve equity. What does inclusion look like? It means we don't need those resources because there aren't barriers in place. I dare to dream, and languaging around that has referred to systematically or systemically equity inclusive.
Lovely, Jane. And I just want to take 30 seconds to thank Alison Campbell, who told me that she couldn't see the information I was sending in the chat. And now I reposted it to everyone because I was in a different chat box. And Alison, if you can see the information now, just you can just tell us on the Q&A portal. Now, François Duhem is asking, thank you, Jane. As we move ahead with integrating GBA Plus, how can we best use the data that StatsCan is providing to support such analysis? I think it's an interesting question. What kind of data can we find just from our statistical institute?
Yeah, so StatsCan has done a lot of work in creating a Center for Diversity and Inclusion Statistics, which was not available to us 5-6 years ago, which is great. Here's my concern with it. It's impact level data. And so, which is aligned with the original vision of GBA application. And this is one of the language communication issues that I'd identified at the front end about the different epistemological views. Because to get to impact, there are a series of results phases that you need to move through, and you don't know where you need gendered data. And I'm suggesting that we need to do a better job at earlier stages than impact. So can we use it? Absolutely. As an aspiration, a lighthouse, I'm like moving forward and encouraging. One of the other sort of encouraging things that has emerged as a result of the Gender Budgeting Act is there is now information, results information, that is posted as part of the budget exercise that is supportive of this. So we're moving in the right direction. Have we got it right? Not yet, but we're getting there.
Great. And we have Christian Nkuzi, who's a student in public administration, and he's asking this very interesting question. What is your assessment of the application of intersectional or GBA Plus approach to evaluation of the Government of Canada programs? Does program development draw on findings from past reports that have applied GBA Plus? And I really do think it's a good dissertation topic, isn't it, for Christian maybe eventually? But it's a good research question. But did you see any research that have taken on, and maybe in your own dissertation there was a little bit of this, but that have taken on the past reports that have applied GBA Plus, and now what can we learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd reference the Canadian Research Chairs program and the work that evaluation has done in that way. They've framed it, to be clear, as equity, diversity, and inclusion. So as of yet, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know that there has actually been a cull of reports comprehensively since the implementation of the policy on results where GBA was articulated as a federal government priority. Based on my access to the research and what I had undertaken, I'd say, you know what, it's not really great. Like, yes, it's better, but I would have hoped 10 years ago that we were further ahead than we are.
Great, Jane, and we still have 2 minutes, so I'm going to take 1 or 2 additional questions before we conclude. I'm looking for how you stand on the next question. There's often talk on GBA Plus used as a box to be ticked rather than a gender mainstream tool. Could you comment on any development for ex-ante analysis and how to properly evaluate the effect of GBA Plus from a quantitative point of view? But what I take from that question is really, are we ticking this as, you know, we've done it, or are we really improving on that respect?
Yeah, I'd suggest historically about 10 years ago, it was done as a accountability. Yes, we're checking the box. I think in evaluation, and I could be biased, full disclosure, given my area of research and interest, that we are actually making progress, because I have seen organizations that would not have ventured into gender-based analysis, another shout out, like to Transport, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, NRCan, that are approaching it in a really systematic way to embed it in their practice, evaluation-wise.
All right, Jane, we're really short on time now. It's close to 1, and I really wanted to thank you for this excellent presentation and exchange of ideas. I'm sorry for all the questions we couldn't take. There was many of them, and I hope it is a continuous conversation. I think we need to have more of these meetings, and so thank you so much, Jane. Thank you to all our participants today. We had more than 300 people on this webinar, and we will try to wrap it up into a video to make it accessible to all those who are here or those who are not here today who couldn't join. And I invite you to take the information I've put into the chat room just to stay in touch. You can become a member of PPX. You can subscribe to some of our newsletter. You can have access information on Carleton's programs or the Canadian Evaluation Society. So keep in touch. I'm saying that we will come back with other webinars like this, and I hope we see you again. Jane, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I did want to say thank you for the opportunity to share and sort of initiate the dialogue on this moving forward. I was wondering if it was possible to capture the Q&A that were provided that we didn't have the opportunity to address, if IT couldn't do that maybe, and send a copy.
Thank you, Jane. We'll see with our IT if we can capture that. I think it's possible with Zoom. It does record the exchange at least, and certainly the questions. Hopefully we can do that. Thank you so much, Jane. Thanks everybody. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.